and welcome to my channel. In recent years, the body of Messiah has received a lot of revelation in terms of end-time prophecy. And I believe this is to be expected because the scriptures tell us that most of the enigmas that were just hidden in the prophecies of the end times were hidden till the time of the end. And I believe that we are living in that time, the time of the end. So I would like to add my small voice to that area. I love prophecy. Those who know me will tell you that if you give me a chance, I'll definitely chew your ear off. In my teaching today, I would like to take you from the prophecy, the 400-year prophecy that God gave to Abraham, right up to the coming of Yeshua. To begin, I want us to look at the summary of the things that we are going to talk about. So we are going to look at who are the Gentiles. We'll try to define the Gentiles according to Scripture. And then we'll look at Israel, the identity of God's people. Israel, God's timepiece for prophecy. And then we'll look at the tribulation. Tribulation, is it in the past? Is it in the present? Or is it something that is yet to happen in the future? And then we'll look at the rapture. What's the real truth about the rapture? Is rapture a separate coming of Christ? Meaning that we are going to have the second coming and then the third coming? Or is it one and same event as the second coming? What is the truth about the rapture? We are going to ignore the terminology. We know that the word rapture is not exactly in Scripture. But we'll overlook that and look at the event itself. So whatever you may want to call it, it doesn't really matter. But we are going to look at that event, which the Bible calls the conversion, when the people of God are going to be translated or transformed in the twinkling of an eye. That's what we're going to look at. And then we are also going to look at where we are at as of today with regards to God's prophetic time clock. In the timeline of prophecy, where are we today? So, to start, I'm going to begin straight into a very controversial subject. That is the identity of God's people. And to begin that, we are going to look at the three sons of Noah. We know that everybody who is alive today is a descendant of either of these three sons of Noah. So when God saved man from the flood, he saved Noah and his wife, and then Noah's three children, his sons, and their wives. And we are going to skip most of the things that are generally agreed, which I also believe are true. So things like Japheth. Japheth represents the white races. It is generally agreed that Japheth represents the white races, and that Ham represents the black races. The controversy comes when we are talking about Shem. Who is Shem? If you look at my presentation here, you can see that it's just a silhouette of a man. No race. But we want to explore that. So we are going to explore this. We are not just causing controversy for the sake of controversy. If I could give this teaching while steering away from this controversial issue, I would. But sometimes there are bridges and obstacles that we have to navigate to arrive at our destination. And unfortunately, this is one of them. So before we even talk about God's people, it is important to state right from the start that whether or not you belong to the chosen nation of God's people after the flesh, there is a pathway for all of us to enter into what the scriptures call the Commonwealth of Israel. Whether you are a Gentile, whether you are a heathen, or whatever other name people may call you by, we all have a pathway to salvation. Nobody is damned merely because of their fleshly upbringing. So, who are God's people? The Bible calls them the elect. And we will explore this word, the elect, later on in the teaching. But my use of the word elect is according to Scripture, referring to Israel, the descendants of Jacob. Those are the elect. The word elect, excuse me for that. The word elect does not mean a believer. It does not mean someone who has converted, a Gentile who has converted to Christianity. No, it refers specifically to the nation that was chosen by God through Jacob. So, that aside, so we have been cultured to believe that the white race of Jews residing today in the nation of Israel are the descendants of Jacob and the chosen people of God. I want to state right from the start that I refute this claim for many reasons. Firstly, if we believe, as we have showcased here, that Ham was black and that he fathered Egypt, Ethiopia, Libya, and Canaan. This is according to Scripture. Let's look at the Bible. Let's look at that Scripture. It's in the Bible in Genesis chapter 10, verse 6. So, chapter 10, verse 6 here. And the sons of Ham, Cush, Cush is Ethiopia. Mizraim, Mizraim is Egypt. Put, Put is Libya, and Canaan. And the sons of Cush, the Bible goes on. So, but the sons who are descendant from Ham were Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. So if we believe then that Ham was black and he fathered these black people, then it will make absolutely no sense for the white children of Jacob. That is, if we assume that Shem was white, meaning that his descendants, of whom Abraham is one of them, and Jacob also is one of them, that would mean that Abraham and Jacob would have been white. So it would make no sense for the white children of Jacob to be confused for the black children of Ham. Where do we find it in Scripture? There are multiple places where we find the children of Jacob being mistaken for black people, namely the children of Ham through Egypt or through Mizraim. So the first one was Joseph. Joseph was mistaken by his brothers. When they went to Egypt during the famine, they could not recognize Joseph. They saw him as just someone who just mixed in with the Egyptians of the time, whom we know are descendants of Ham. And then when we go to Exodus chapter 2, verse 19, we meet Exodus chapter 2, verse 19. So we meet Moses, who has run away from Egypt because he has killed an Egyptian and is now running away from Pharaoh. And he gets to Midian. We'll remember that Midian is actually a descendant of Abraham through, I believe it's Keturah. Don't hold me to that. I'm just saying this off my head. I believe it's Keturah. Yeah, so Midian is a descendant of Abraham. And Midian, if we believe that Abraham was white, then Midian would have to be white. And We meet the children of Jethro, a Midianite. They are assisted by Moses in watering their father's flock. And they get home very early, and the father is confused. I mean, he doesn't understand how they managed to do it. I mean, so quickly. And he asks them, "How did you do this?" And their response was, "And they said, an Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds, and also drew water enough for us and watered the flock." How could white people mistake another white person for a black person? It makes no sense. It makes no sense. We also go to Acts chapter 28. Acts chapter 21, verse 38. Acts. Acts 21, verse 38. So, in Acts chapter 21, verse 38, we find here, let's begin from verse 36, just to get the context. "For the multitude of the people followed after, crying, 'Away with him!' And as Paul was led into the castle, he said unto the chief captain, 'May I speak unto thee?' Who said, 'Canst thou speak Greek? Art not thou that Egyptian which before these days madest an uproar, and leddest out into the wilderness 400 men that were murderers?' But Paul said, 'I am a man which am a Jew of Tarsus, a city in Sicilia, a citizen of no mean city, and I beseech thee, suffer me to speak unto the people.'" So here is a Roman soldier, a white Roman soldier. He looks at Paul and he says, "You don't look like me. You look like an Egyptian. You look like an Egyptian." So we see a compounding evidence that points to the fact that there is discrepancies when we want to look at God's chosen people and believe that they are white. I know it's true that this alone may not be sufficient evidence to disapprove the Hebrew people, that the Hebrew people were white. But when we look at more discrepancies, the evidence becomes more compelling. The next thing we are going to look at is the intermarriages. There were many intermarriages between the children of Israel and the children of Ham. Most prominent of which is Moses. Moses married a black woman. We know the story. I don't have to go into that to look for that scripture for you to. But so Moses married a black woman. And then we see also Judah married a Canaanite woman. That's in Genesis chapter 38, verse 32. Let's have a look at that. Genesis 38, verse 32. Verse 2, sorry. We'll just start off verse 1. "And it came to pass at that time that Judah went down from his brethren and turned to a certain Adullamite, whose name was Hira. And Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua. And he took her and went in unto her. And she conceived and bare a son, and he called his name And she conceived again and bare a son, and she called his name Onan. And she yet again conceived and bare a son, and called his name Shelah. And he was at Chezib when she bare him." So these are the three descendants of Judah. We know that the first two died, and the third one, Judah refused to give him over to the wife of the first. I hope you remember that story. But it is clear then that the descendants of Judah, if you accept that Judah was white, then all the descendants of Judah after him would have been a mixture. But we know that that is not true. That is not true. There is a lot of compelling evidence that tells us that Judah was black and he married a black woman. So, and then the children of Ham and the children of Shem, from whom Abraham descended, lived among each other. They socialized, and there were no issues whatsoever about one nation of the people considering the other deplorable. And yet, when we come to meet the Gentiles, remember the Gentiles don't really feature in the Bible until in the New Testament. You can search the whole Old Testament. The first time the word Gentile comes, it's when it is being introduced. That's in Genesis chapter 10, in the table of nations. The next time it is talked about, it's I believe it's in Judges, when the Bible is talking about the charitoth of the Gentiles. I don't know what that means. But any other time that the word Gentiles is mentioned in the Old Testament, it's prophetic. It's talking about events that will happen in the future. It's not talking about the children of Israel interacting with the Gentiles, because there is no interaction with the Gentiles, between the Gentiles and the children of Israel whatsoever throughout the Old Testament. We meet the Gentiles in the New Testament. That's when we see them. And when we meet them in the New Testament, there is a kind of animosity between these two peoples. You find that Peter looks at the Gentiles and he does not believe that they can be accepted into the commonwealth of Israel. When he's told when he's told to go and minister to the Gentiles, he is hesitant. He doesn't want to go to the Gentiles. Why? It's because they never socialized, they never mingled, they never intermarried. There was absolute hatred between these two peoples. And yet, when you look at the children of Ham, Israel had no such issues with them. They intermarried, as we have seen. They are socialized. When there was famine in one side of the country, the other side would go to the other side to find sustenance. So there was no such animosity. But when the Gentiles come in, there is an animosity. People generally think that Israel was prohibited from intermarrying and associating with, eating with other people that are not Israel, but that is not true. It's only true as far as the Gentiles are concerned. It's only true as far as the Gentiles are concerned. The other thing that we also find in Scripture is the fact that when Yeshua was sending his disciples to go and minister to the people, to the lost sheep of Israel, they are told not to go in the way of the Gentiles. Gentiles are excluded. But there is amongst Jesus' own disciples a Canaanite, Simon the Canaanite. Yes, Jesus had a black disciple called Simon the Canaanite. He was a Canaanite, a descendant of Ham through Canaan. So you see this throughout Scripture. It's woven throughout Scripture. The children of Ham being found amongst the children of Jacob, being found and mingling and intermarrying. And at one point when the children of Israel were actually coming out of Egypt in the Exodus, we are told that they were joined by a mixed multitude. They were joined by a mixed multitude. And throughout Scripture, in the Torah, we find that the Bible tells us that whosoever chooses to enjoin themselves to Israel becomes part of Israel. Who was God talking about? He was talking about the black nations that were around Israel. If they chose to enjoin themselves with Israel. They were supposed to be bound by the same laws, the same commandments, statutes of God that God had given to Israel. So the black people among whom Israel lived, they were not Gentiles. So I'm carrying on to the next thing that I said we're going to talk about who are the Gentiles. So they were not Gentiles. There is a name that is given to all those black people that lived among Israel. But Gentiles is not one of them. So, who were the Gentiles? Who were the Gentiles? That's the next thing that we want to explore.